Well, hello. It's the girl Karaleise. Welcome to this video, and I am here to help you think better so you can work better and have higher quality deliverables. So, what are we talking about today? We are talking about definition of ready. So, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back to talk about this. All right, welcome back. Definition of ready. So I did a video about this before, and I'll put the video right here where you can go and listen to what I talked about when I was talking about definition of ready and what it really means in general. In this video, we're going to go a little bit deeper and give you some examples of what definition of ready could look like in your organization. So you have an example of what that is, and talk a little bit about the tips when you're coming up with your definition of ready. So, ready? Let's go. So, what is DOR, definition of ready, right? It's a way to avoid beginning to work on unready issues. The worst thing you want to happen to you is to be inside the middle of a sprint and then you realize the story isn't refined, it doesn't have the right acceptance criteria, the business requirements weren't clear. Like that would not be good because now you have to stop and try to find another story and it's just really, really unpleasant, right? So you want to avoid that. That's what definition of ready is going to help you to avoid. It's going to limit the risk of misunderstanding, right? So it limits the risks of misunderstanding. So because you spent the time making the story ready, you'll be able to understand it and you'll be able to clarify that with the team. There's no waste of time with discussions about the work process. So you don't have to go back and forth for every single story about what it means for this one to be ready versus the other one. You already clarified that before, and it should apply to all of your stories. There's efficient communication between the members. So this is another thing that definition of ready helps with, having good communication between members. So efficient communication between members. When we say members, we mean team members, right? Stable velocity since there is less risk of postponing, right? So as you're trying to get started, especially if you're a new Scrum team and you're trying to determine what your velocity is, when you have these stories that are in DOR, then there's less risk of having to postpone doing that story. And so you can have a better grasp of what your velocity is because you don't have stories jumping in and out because you're not ready. All right, so these are just some of the things that definition of ready helps with. It's definitely a good thing to have at the beginning when you're forming your Scrum team so that everybody knows what the story should look like when it's ready. All right. And this is especially beneficial for the BA because you are producing these stories, right? It's your main deliverable to produce user stories. So you have to know when it's ready for them to pick it up in the sprint. So making sure it has all the things that the team agreed on is going to be critical. And if you can document this somewhere, so it's written somewhere so people can go look at it if new team members join, and so you don't end up having the same conversations over and over. All right. So that is what definition of ready is. Now, what's the benefit? All right. So we talked a little bit about the benefit just now, but definition of ready it's a checklist, right? So the team comes up with this checklist of all of the explicit criteria that the user story must meet before being accepted into the next sprint. So it's really all of the things that you think you need to have into a story so that it can be worked on by the developer. So they don't have to be asking a bunch of questions. They don't have to be running around trying to figure out what this means. Everything is there for them to just go off and code, right? Make it easy for them to know what to code. They are super professional at going out and coding things, but where they get stuck is when they have to figure out what are you actually asking them to do. And if the user story wasn't discussed and the clarity is not in the story, then they also have that confusion, and you definitely don't want that as a business analyst. So here are some examples of definition of ready. So for example, story must use user story format, that is, as a type of user. I want some features so I can have some benefit. Maybe you'll say as a part of your DOR, every story must have that format, right? You could also say, for example, acceptance criteria must be clear and testable. Seems very obvious, but you want to make sure that all of your ACs can be easily understood and also they can be tested. Story has been estimated by the team. So one of your definition of ready could be that the story has to be estimated already before you can go into the sprint. Some teams want to estimate during the sprint, but a lot of people prefer to have the estimations done ahead of time. And then when they get to sprint planning, it's just a matter of trying to meet that velocity. UX designs exist where appropriate. So if you have design and you want to make sure that those designs are already attached to the story and those designs are discussed and we have accepted them, then that could be a part of your definition of ready, that the design is done. Some teams do this, some teams don't. Some teams might say, we already have the design systems. We already know what the standards are. So if we need to write a story to, let's say, add a new modal, we don't really need a design because we're already going to pull from our existing pattern for what a model looks like. So all we need to know is what's the new things that will go into this model, but we don't really need a design. It depends. Depends on how thorough your style guide, your design systems are, that you may or may not need to have a design. But if you do, that could be a part of your DOR to say the design has to be there. So the UX designer has to get that done. And if you are the person coming up with the design, then you have to do that mock-up or that wireframe and be able to add that to the story. All right. Another thing could be non-functional requirement is discussed where appropriate. So part of your DOR could be, in order for the story to be ready, we have to make sure we've discussed the non-functional, such as your performance. You may not have a requirement or AC that says performance has to be XYZ speed, right? But it might just be a discussion that you say, we want to make sure that as we're doing this feature, we don't negatively impact performance. And we talk about those things. We talk about security. We talk about making sure we stay within the regulations. Things like those that could be non-functional requirements that you want to make sure you've discussed before you start working on any story. You could put that as a part of your definition of ready. So here's another example of definition of ready. This one's a little bit more concise. So the acceptance criteria is clear and concise. All right, that's one element of your DOR. Dependent stories have been identified and linked. So if you're using a tool like Jira or DevOps, we want to make sure that before the story can get worked on, you identify any dependencies and you link the stories that have dependencies. So you may have a story that's related with the story you're writing, or it could be blocking it, or whatever the dependency could be, or it could be something that's really a functional dependency, like you have to do this story before you do the next one, because this one provides the output of this one provides the input for the other one. So those kinds of dependencies have to be identified before you start working on any of them. That could be a part of your DOR. You could also say that API mapping is included where necessary. So some of these stories, even though you as the BA or the product owner, you may not know the exact API calls, the response, the get response, and the call and what the data fields are that you pass. You may not know all of that stuff, and you don't need to know it. As you can hear from me, I don't know either. I am not claiming to be a programmer at all. But the API mapping may be important for the developer to know how to build the story. So you have to get with maybe the solution architect, maybe with a backend developer, and find out what that is and have them put that in the story so that when someone picks up the story, they have all the information they need to work on it. So that could be a part of your definition of ready, to say the story is not ready if the API information is not in there. All right. Product owner reviewed and approved the story. So you could have an approval process for your story where you can't just, write the story and then put it in the sprint, right? You have to get it seen by someone. Someone has to approve it. Someone has to look at it and make sure that this is meeting the business requirements and that you're following business rules. You're not going to build something that's going to create a backdoor somewhere. So you may need to get the product owner approval, and that's a part of your definition of ready. UI artifacts reviewed and accepted. This is what I was talking about earlier. So if you have UI elements or UX designs that need to be a part of the story, then that needs to be reviewed with the UX team and the development team, of course, front end developers, maybe mobile developers, to make sure they can actually do it. So this is a part of your refinement conversation. So once you've had those refinement conversations and it's okay, everything a go, then that makes it ready because the design has been discussed. You do not want to have a situation where you're going into the sprint planning and they're seeing it for the first time, because all kinds of worms can come out of cans if you do that, right? You're opening a can of worms for sure. Story has been refined by the Scrum team. So, regardless of it having a UX design or not, if you write a story, the entire team has to see it. I did a video, which you can see right here, where I talk about there's nowhere to hide as a BA, where you have to be transparent. So, a part of your definition of ready is that the story has been seen, has been refined, has been discussed by the entire team. Okay. That way, everybody knows what they're building and why we're building it. And if there's any problems, they can call it out. You can have it solved before you go off and build something that's wrong. All right. So it's all transparent. And that definitely should be a part of your definition of ready. There's clear understanding of how to test the story, and the test data is available. So part of your definition of ready would be to make sure that as you've written these acceptance criteria, they can be tested. Because what makes a good requirement? That it's testable, right? Among other things. But the main thing is that if you cannot test it, it is not a requirement. Okay? It must be testable. So as you're discussing your story, you have to be talking with your QA to say, how are they going to test this? And for them to test it, sometimes they need data. Who's going to provide that data? Okay, so these are the things that you must discuss to make sure your story is ready for it to be worked on. And that should form a part of your definition of ready. So the last part of this is the team understands how to demo the story. Okay, so it goes hand in hand with the ability to test it. So once you're able to test it, you should also have a way to demo it, because at the end of your sprint, you want to do the sprint review where you actually show what you've been able to accomplish during the sprint. And if you're in one of those companies where you're working for a client and the client needs to be able to see what you've been able to work on, then if you've done all this work for the sprint and then you can't show it, that's kind of rough, right? So a part of your discussion to make your story ready is how can we demo this? And that could also include having the data, having the environment, having the users, probably the login credentials, all that stuff to be able to demo the story. All right. So here are some tips for your definition of ready. First, you're going to work with the team. Again, don't do these things in silo. Don't go off by yourself and come up with all of these things that nobody really know. Okay. If you're working with a PO, have discussions with the PO, have discussions with other BAs in the group, have discussions with project managers if you work with project managers, and eventually have a discussion with the entire team where the entire team can give feedback to make sure you're having the right things in your definition of ready. Make it visible. So there's a place they can go and find the list of things that makes a story ready. And a good place to have this is Confluence if you're using Jira Suite. It could also just be in a Word document on a SharePoint somewhere or wherever the team can go access it. Make it visible, okay? And then refine it. It's not set in stone. You are agile, okay? So when you're doing your retrospective, if something isn't working, bring it up and then use the input from the discussions in the retrospective to amend and adjust and refine your definition of ready. So that's it, gang. That's what I have for you today, talking about definition of ready and all the ways that you can make your story ready so you can have the best sprint planning. Everything can be well organized. You can have great output. Your sprints can be successful. See, I'm here to help you think better so you can work better and have higher quality deliverables. So this is how you do that, right? Having good definition of ready. Guys, go and check out my website, karaleise.com. I have some great things on there. There's a fit test to check if you're a fit for the business analyst role. I have courses on there for you to learn more like you've learned today about definition of ready. Learn more about business analysis, user stories, writing requirements, UML documents, things like that. And also check out the case studies to help you to understand how you could create documents and deliverables and user stories of high quality and how you apply the thinking, the analytical skills to a real world problem. All right. So go to my website, karaleise.com, check those things out, and I will see you guys next time. Take care.